results in an extractive economy, harmed people and communities, and an environment contributing to cancer incidents specifically. She is also a facilitator with the Finding Freedom and Warm Data Lab host with the International Bateson Institute. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Tina Indo. Dr. Indo brings more than 15 years of environmental public practitioner experience to her work, including professional experience with the U.S. Environmental Protective Agency, where she developed multiple national air quality standards aimed at reducing human and environmental health impacts criteria and toxic air pollutants. I would next like to introduce Dr. Jamil Bey, excitingly the Director of Pittsburgh City Planning, as well as the Strategic Director of UrbanKind Institute. Dr. Bey stirs critical thinking by facilitating through tough conversations around race, equity, and systemic change. In addition to Dr. Bey's role as UrbanKind's visionary, he serves on many boards and councils throughout Pittsburgh, everyone loves him, to drive real systemic change in policy and programming that affects underserved populations. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Lisa Freeman. She's the owner of Freeman Family Farm and Greenhouse. Lisa attended the University of Pittsburgh for both her undergraduate and graduate studies, and she holds a dual master's degree in both social work and public administration. Lisa has spent her entire professional life working with low-income communities, most at risk for violence, drug abuse, mental health challenges, and family dysfunction. And I would also like to mention, today we're going to be referencing the Pittsburgh Environmental Justice Summit. We were all part of the planning process for the summit. And lastly, I would like to transition to Danny, who will be discussing the creation of an inclusive environmental justice summit.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Andre. Andre and I are the only two employees of the Cancer and Environment Network of Southwest PA, and Andre has moved to the Pacific Northwest, so it's really amazing to be in person in the same room with him again, because we have a good time. So yeah, you can go to the first slide, Bella. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start by letting you know how this happened. It's just a fun story about how this kind of came together. So Andre and I had secured a very small amount of funding, $10,000, to do something environmental justice related. It was very broad in the grant, and so we were kicking around a few ideas. Is it going to be an academic symposium, maybe a retreat for community organizers? He and I really were very interested in facilitating some community offerings for people living in communities that are most impacted by environmental injustices. We also have a senior advisor of the network who really wanted an academic symposium, so we were kind of stuck. It had been a few months and we weren't really moving forward. And then Tina and I, who are connected in a lot of ways, we're friends, which is the best part. But also Tina is the science chair for the network that Andre and I run. And she's on our leadership council. And Tina may tell you more about what she does at Pitt, but I'm also involved in the center that she's part of at Pitt. And so we were just chatting one day, and I was telling her about this. I don't actually know who brought it up first, but Tina was like, I am planning an academic symposium, an environmental justice symposium. And she had her own independent funding, so we decided to team up and do it together. And so you can see here, like, what can we do together? This is an early vision, and you'll see over the next few minutes how it kind of language shifted. But we envisioned a one-day symposium addressing environmental health disparities, including cancer, due to environmental injustices, surrounded by healing justice practice spaces for people in impacted communities. And should I? Okay. And sorry. No, I will. I just let myself get too distracted. And so basically we thought we could do everything, right? We're going to do both. We're going to do what we had been thinking about. We were going to do what Tina thought about, and like, we're done. Easy peasy, no problems, let's do it. And it didn't quite work out like that. And we are ready to go to the next slide whenever Bella's ready. But I'll just keep talking for now. So the next thing that we did was we put together a really great planning committee, and we had representation from, nope, well, that's fine. Yeah, that's okay. We had representation on the planning committee from academics, community benefit organizations, people living in impacted communities. And when we started talking to them and getting some input on what we wanted to do together, there were a lot of questions. specifically about using the word healing. That was one of the questions they had. How does this connect to an academic symposium? It seemed very like disparate experiences to them. And why are we doing this was another, there were a lot of questions. And so we thought, okay, let's take a step back and really talk about why this is important to us, what it means to us, and what it could mean to the communities. And so we kind of got everybody together and started talking about the concept of a healing justice practice space. And so I wanted to share a little bit of this background with you all too, what's behind these concepts. So healing justice is a political strategy co-created by Kara Page that seeks to center liberation back inside of, collective power. So it recognizes that strategies have always existed for resilience, and it seeks to regenerate those strategies and bring them back into the community. And sometimes, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Sometimes healing justice comes up in healing justice practice spaces. So the idea of this work is ancient. It goes across multiple cultural contexts. But the term healing justice practice space and having things in this iteration in our modern times goes back about 20 years. Sometimes they're pop-up events. Sometimes it's permanent programming and organizations' activities. But it is always all-bodied, all-gendered, accessible spaces for both practicing healing, receiving healing, giving healing. And what happens inside those spaces really varies. There's a list here of some of the different things you might see: massage therapy, acupuncture, divination, meditation, all kinds of stuff. For us, when we were talking about doing this, the most important factors were, one, what do people in the communities want? And two, what do the people in the communities have to offer? Because we didn't have any interest in bringing something to the community that didn't already exist. That's one of the most critical concepts of healing justice practice spaces. This is already here. People have already been doing this. They are either not recognized for it, or similar to the feedback we received in the beginning, the value might not be recognized. And so we went through those questions to really kind of see what that would look like for us. And so after that, our planning committee really pretty much came on board, and we did a little bit of shifting. These are the goals that we agreed to with everybody, and you'll see the language shifted to community healing events. At the time, these were internal goals, so that's kind of where the language shifted there. You can go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. And then on our final marketing piece, we put environmental justice in practice. So at the end, we found that it was very helpful to describe what we were doing, this 3-day event, as a full-day academic symposium where we were discussing environmental justice, surrounded by a couple of days where we were practicing environmental justice. And then these are some of the offerings that we had over the 3 days. We were in 4 different communities. And we both started and ended the summit with really lovely events that connected everybody to the Earth's ecosystem that we are currently in. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Tina to talk more about the summit and what happened after.
Okay. So I get the pleasure of talking about some of the lessons learned that we had with the summit, and some of our future plans. And I'll just note too, because I don't know if it was really clear or not, but I'm with the University of Pittsburgh currently. I was with the EPA for quite a while. Yes, 15 plus years of work in environmental spaces. But I'm currently in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health, where I am on faculty as an associate professor, and I also get the pleasure of leading the Center for Public Health Practice, and for working with a couple of new centers at the university that are focused on environmental health research. And so really, I think part of my goal is to figure out how do we create spaces that are intentionally community engaged and community focused with the work that's being done, where the benefits are going, who the partners are, creating partnerships that are authentic and that have a power sharing structure that really respect what's in the community already and who should appropriately be at the table. So I'll start, and we'll get caught up with the slides here, but when we looked at the summit, and Danny did such a great job of talking about how things shifted. One thing that was important to us was that we were focused on healing. We did not want a summit that was focused on, let us tell you all the problems that exist, because folks are very much aware of the problems. So we wanted a summit that talked real talk about what was going on, but that was also connected to solutions. And we looked at those solutions as what we ultimately ended up calling the environmental justice and practice sessions. And just with the thought of, when you're with the doctors and everything, they're practicing medicine, we're practicing environmental justice in the communities by offering sessions that were really focused on how do we bring about the type of environments that we want to see. So we had healthy cooking sessions, we had art therapy sessions, we had sessions that were, you know, as folks were telling us what they wanted to see, what's the type of environment that you want long term. One thing that I will say, when we stopped and reflected on the summit, maybe the day of, the day after, the days after, the summit was very joyful. And that was this amazing surprise for us, because we knew that we wanted to connect solutions, but we did not expect the laughter, the connections, the reaction that we received. We were overwhelmed with registration at the very beginning. We only had space for 130-ish people. Those spaces were gone within 2 weeks, so we knew that that there was a need, and we'll have more space next year. But those 3 days, like you see the picture there, it helped that our keynote was Dr. Wilson. He really set the tone for what folks should expect, what folks should demand. But we also had just great connections with a lot of folks local to Pittsburgh who are already doing the work. Can go to the next slide, Bella. Thank you. So just some of the feedback, and I want to caveat this by saying, I'll talk about lessons learned. We did not do a good job of collecting feedback, so take this with a grain of salt. We sent the surveys too late, and we got a really low response rate. So this is less than 10% of the participants in terms of this feedback. But overall, we saw that people were satisfied with most of the offerings from the summit. We look at the events, everything was at least a 5 or higher, or I think a 6 or higher, with how people saw value. And we just asked them 0 to 10, give us a rating on the various events there. And from my angle, can't quite see what we have there. But between our opening session, the keynote speech, I think, was our highest rated topic. No surprise there. Our warm data lab, I will say with that, we don't really have time to go into it, but I encourage you to reach out and talk with Danny about what is that. Because I think one thing that we found is people being given a space to connect outside of the hats that we wear. We're so used to, I'm Tina, I'm an associate professor, I'm a director for the Cancer and Environment Network. The Warm Data Lab got us out of those titles and got us talking about how we see different issues. So I would encourage you to connect with Danny about what that looks like, so you can learn about it if you've never heard of Warm Data Labs. Our vacant lot tour, that was one of our environmental justice sessions that we had, where we were focused on connecting people to the community. As is true with a lot of environmental justice concerns, a lot of areas experiencing environmental justice burdens, there are neighborhoods in Pittsburgh that have high rates of vacant lots, and that has so many impacts on overall environmental health. Where we were hosting the summit main day was in an area where the vacant lot rate is through the roof. And some of the faculty at Pitt have been working with community partners to identify priorities for lots for redevelopment, and we got to get outside and see that, and people got to talk about it. I heard lots of interesting conversations. I heard some conversations too where I felt like I need to pull you aside and, and talk to you a little bit more. But we can't really get people to understand and support the problem until there's awareness of the problem. So that was a big goal for some of these sessions, was to just raise awareness. I'm going to step over maybe a couple of the other things, but I do want to just highlight the bearing witness ceremony that was there. Oh, can you go back one, Bella? Sorry. The bearing witness ceremony that got really great feedback there. When we did the bearing witness ceremony, that was a time for us to really be in person in a part of Pittsburgh where One of the U.S. Steel facilities is still in operation and still a heavy polluter. It's one of the heaviest polluters in the state of Pennsylvania, the second largest polluter in the state, largest polluter in our county. And to be in the backyard of a resident who's lived there the majority of her life, and to see and smell and feel the health impacts that come with that type of air is just a very different experience for a lot of folks who live 10 miles away, but who are, really an entire country away in terms of how they experience air quality. So we had lots of things that I would say were very much focused on, let us, show you. Let's show you some of the challenges. Let us show you some of the beautiful things that are happening in the community. And I think that balance really made for a success. So looking at, I guess, more successes, I think I've chatted on some of these. Our keynote, of course, with Dr. Wilson, he really helped folks focus on what resources were available, help them focus on the language. A challenge that we had is that some of the language is not necessarily common across community members who are doing the work. So hearing the language, I think, was really powerful and let people connect with what they were already doing. We've talked about the real-world experiences already, so I'm going to move over that. The EJ and practice sessions, I think Danny did a great job of highlighting how we had community partners doing the work. We did not bring in new entities to the community. We highlighted folks who are already there doing a lot of that work. We had participation from community organizations, from government, from academia. We had Dr. Bay, who is employed by the city of Pittsburgh, not the county, city. So we had some government representation. We also had someone from the county executive's office come and speak with us. We had several academic partners, lots of community partners, and just a great exchange of information. And then the last thing is that we intentionally focused on well-being. That was critical from the beginning. And before I shift to the opportunities, some of the challenges, I will just add to the language that we had with healing. It was tricky. Danny highlighted how it was tricky on the academic side. It was tricky on the community side too, because that word means a lot of different things to a lot of different entities. And so for some folks, when we started talking about healing, it was, are we talking about spiritual? What, are we talking about physical? What does that mean? And the lack of, I guess, our desire or willingness to try and put it in a box, it made for very uncomfortable conversations and a lot of feedback from community partners of, you need to think about if that's the word that you want to use, because you may be confusing or possibly misrepresenting the language with certain folks. So we thought about how to keep the intention there, but have language that felt like it was inclusive and grounded in what we were getting in terms of feedback from partners. So opportunities, the list of things we did not do great. Our logistical challenges, our timeline was so short. As Danny noted, we both were trying to make this work, and we actually needed each other for it to come to fruition. It was too much work for either of our organizations to do independently, and it ended up being a beautiful connection, but we had about 4 months to pull it together. And the 4 people that you see here were 99% of the workers. So we know to start a year out. It was our desire before, but again, we were both kind of stalled. So we'll start sooner. Our registration, I'm calling it version 1.0. Anyone else would probably call it a beta version or something. We did the best we could with a small team, but that's certainly an area where we heard that we could have done better. We won't be on Qualtrics next year. And then our survey administration was just, it was not done quickly enough. We lost a lot of folks. We should have been giving out surveys the day of. Definitely while you have a captive audience, give out surveys. I'm sure we'll get one while we're here. Other challenges that we had just with balancing resources and power, I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but there was a push and pull for the two of us, because both of our organizations, I would say, are maybe in the secondary category when Dr. Wilson was talking about primary, secondary, tertiary, he kept going on. Because we recognized that, we were very intentional about, we don't want to be the drivers of what this looks like. We want it to be what the community wants it to look like. But that caused a lot of tension with like, well, what do you mean you want us to tell you what to do? You're coming to us to say, tell us what the summit should look like. So we were really trying to give enough structure that folks could be reactive and that it didn't feel like we were saying do the work for us and plan it, but also trying to be respectful of we don't want to be the primary drivers. And part of our goal, I would say, for like moving forward and moving into the space is to just really find out how we can help pull in a coalition of partners that can help support a summit for the future years. And I say that recognizing like there's always, I would say, a tension with how do you leverage resources. The university has a lot of resources. How do we leverage those resources, but then get out of the way? And the reality is we didn't have a partner who like had the resources and said like we can really contribute and give you time and energy, and it was a lot to ask. But I think we've figured out some strategies that will be useful as we move forward. And now that people have seen it, it's easier for them to weigh in on like, here's how we want it to look in the future. So don't be afraid to just to let something come together and then talk it through. All right. So then leveraging the resources. Again, as someone who has been doing environmental justice work and related works for 15 plus years, it's great to be now at an institution where there's more freedom to do the work and a lot more resources. While I was at the Environmental Protection Agency, I loved the work. I loved thinking how we could push things forward, but it was very limited in terms of how much I could leverage those resources and what that could look like in terms of pushing certain boundaries. But with the University of Pittsburgh, we have engagement centers that are in 3 different neighborhoods. One is under construction, but in Pittsburgh, all are neighborhoods that are disadvantaged neighborhoods in terms of high environmental burden, higher rates of poverty, largely, I think all are minority, majority, black and brown communities, and actually Pittsburgh is majority black communities. But we have these 3 community engagement centers. We actually were at these 2 for the summit, and what that provides is free space. And I mean, space is huge. So we'll continue to leverage those resources as it's appropriate. We got great feedback on the location and accessibility of the spaces. So that's certainly one thing that we'll look at. Funding that comes with university levers. One thing we're pushing for is more university-sponsored funding where community partners are PIs or co-PIs on the work. There's a lot of internal funding available at Pitt, and largely they want Pitt faculty as the primary contributor, but we have the ability to at least have some resources where we're thinking about more community-engaged research. We do have several academic partnerships where we're looking at how to leverage community partners with environmental research. The Center for Health, Environment, and Engaged Research has a great community engagement core. I'm biased. Yeah, a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't say that. We have our FAIR study, which is really focused on a play of words between fair and air, and thinking about how can we bring forward low-cost interventions to help improve indoor air quality and hopefully reduce asthma severity. So with studies like that, we work with community partners and also elevate and amplify work that they want us to do. So for instance, we have a partner in the Mon Valley who's really focused on wanting to get a community health survey done in addition to this type of work. So we're partnering with them, having them at all stages of the research development, the IRB, the survey development, the analytics, and really trying to make sure that we are amplifying work that's important to them as well. And then thinking about how can we do capacity building and power sharing with our community partners. And there are, again, resources that train on how to get your grant proposal put together, how to get your research ethics training done so that you can be an equal participant in some of the research development. But we have to make our partners aware, and we have to make it easy to get to. I think that's it. All right, and then I think this is the last thing here is just on sustaining the momentum. So when we think about our year 2 and beyond, some of the things that we want to really hit on in the second year is we really want to pull in the youth. We talked about it for the first year, but time just did not allow. And we know that pulling in the youth is a great way to sustain momentum and to think about, building that next generation of leaders and supporting and encouraging the next generation of leaders. Here you see Layla Johnson, who sent me this picture just here recently. And Layla is a youth activist in Braddock, and that's another area in Pittsburgh that is the home of one of the U.S. Steel facilities. So heavily polluted, not as bad as Clairton, the other area, but certainly severely impacted. And Layla, as a high school senior, took it upon herself to get low-cost monitors in. First, she did it in her home. She got a monitor, then she put in an air purifier, then she monitored again, and was like, wow, this is making a huge difference in my indoor air quality. She noticed that her and her mom were coughing less, and so she wanted to get that done for all of her neighbors. So she initiated monitoring projects in her neighborhood. She got monitors or purifiers brought into all their homes. She worked with a local community organization to get that done. And is just like the ideal person for a Summit, EJ Summit network, whatever you want to call it there, but one of our youth leaders for sure. And then we can also think about how do we get mentors with those youth partners, so that there's really two-way sharing, because they can teach the mentors a lot as well. And then for the forward-looking momentum, we want to start where year one ended. We ended year one with collective action, and our theme was connection, reflection, connection, collective action. We wanted to start year one with collective action because we were like, people know this stuff, they're connected. And once we started planning, we realized they don't know it, they are not connected. So we started, we took a couple steps back. And year two going forward, we really want the focus to be on collective action and what we can do. And the only other thing I'll note is that we want to really make sure that at the summit in the future that we have intentional space for connection and collaboration. There's so many folks doing work in similar spaces that they just need some time and a room to get together. So we'll be very intentional with that. And so I am going to stop there and turn it over to Dr. Bay.
So Bella, Andre, Tina, and Danny were the four organizers of this summit. And Lisa and I and a bunch of other folks were brought in afterwards, hey, can you speak, can you do this? And so our part, we have nothing to do with that. Our part is, okay, now that we found love, what are we going to do with it? And so I'll start there. And just by a show of hands, a little pop quiz. How many of you remember when Dwight Eisenhower was president? Okay, nobody here? All right, okay, well, let's do it again. About when was Dwight Eisenhower president? This is your history. About when? 50s and 60s, right. So the coke ovens that she was referencing at the U.S. Steel plant were built when Dwight Eisenhower was president. Okay, so these are coke ovens that heat coal to between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees to bake off the impurities to produce coke, so that when you're making the steel, you don't have the impurities in it. And so it's that highly concentrated carbon is a necessary ingredient in steel making, okay? Bad ingredient in community building. And so one of the people who, my first teaching job out of undergrad, I got a job teaching in Clairton and did a tour of the community, and U.S. Steel, at one point, the largest corporation in the U.S., had their plant. And if you saw this thing, this is like, the person who they're talking about where we went to do the bearing witness thing. This giant polluter, this giant toxic emitter, like the nastiest process. They're so nasty, depending on the weather conditions, you wake up sometime and you say, smells like Pittsburgh. And I live about 15 miles away from there. And you can just smell the sulfur in the air. And okay, it's a weather day. They're really good at, on holidays and weekends, really emitting heavily because the county monitors aren't at work. And so that's an extra special day when they're going to emit and exceed what they're allowed to do. And during the last primary election when they're looking for our previous county executive, he's one of these old school Democrat, union, he would definitely have been a Republican earlier, but as those policies change, he's a union guy, he's a steel guy, this is his money, they contribute to his campaign. He was pro, U.S. Steel should be there for the jobs that we're sacrificing lives for, kind of a person. And, he didn't want anybody talking about this problem, this emitter. All of the churches in this area where, in around Clairton, they get donations for U.S. Steel. And so, people don't talk about it. But during the last campaign, like during the last primaries, they were running ads about U.S. Steel's commitment to environmentalism, the greening efforts. The Heinz Endowment sponsored a study that showed that air quality, PM 2.8, 2.5, and 0.8, can be directly responsible, removing all other variables, for reducing the lives of black men in Allegheny County by 8.2 years. All other things being equal, the violence and the other issues, the stress of being a black man, 8.2 years directly attributable to air quality. I'm going to tie this to our work. And so I founded the UrbanKind Institute in about 2015. I didn't make it in academia. It wasn't for me. And so we started it as a community-based think tank, a research tank for communities. I have a PhD in geography. We've hired a few other folks, in the early days. And what we could do is we could advocate for communities. We could do research with communities for the stuff that they wanted to do. And, because, I'm still a decent scientist when I want to be, I can argue. And I can make a case, and I can, make connections and debunk arguments. And so what we really got good at is calling bullshit. I'm going to be a little more crass than my other folks. And I also didn't notice what time I started, so, but I won't be too long. And in that, I wrote a piece, an editorial, where I called out Pittsburgh's anchor institutions and said, you all suck. And what started this, Carnegie Mellon University produced a map for their incoming students of Pittsburgh, said, hey, here are the Pittsburgh neighborhoods. And on this map, it didn't just label them. They were erased. The boundaries were erased from all of the black neighborhoods. And this was, oh my goodness, that's horrible. And it is, but that's and so my piece was about, that's effed up, but so is every other institute. You created this. This is a map that really exists in the white mind. These neighborhoods are invisible. But if you go and map where your black employees work, they live in those invisible neighborhoods. And so this condition, this is the University of Pittsburgh, this is City Council, this is the mayor's office, this is the museums. All of your years of disinvestment and disinterest created this white map in your mind. So don't act like, oh my goodness, that's horrible, but don't scapegoat them when you're all a part of this creation of knowledge production, right? And so in that, since it was well written, it really was, I was proud of that one. A lot of the folks reached out to me and said, what can we do better? And it's so let's start with Tina's institution, University of Pittsburgh. Nordberg was the chancellor then. Anyway, this was before she got there. The chancellor reached out, and we had a couple of conversations. Here are the areas where you fail as an anchor institution. And one of them was you have a top-ranked school of education, and the high schools, the city school district sucks. What's your relationship to the school district? Why do you not, if you're a top institution in producing educators, why is this acceptable to you? In that year, and somebody on the inside slipped us some information, they accepted 3 black students from the school district of Pittsburgh that got accepted to the main campus of the University of Pittsburgh. One of them accepted and attended, but they offered admission to 3 black students in the city. And this is acceptable to you. And you don't question this, and you're a fine institution. And so when they, tell us more about how we can be involved. And so our work and our role has been look, somebody has to advocate and call bullshit, and nobody else is doing that. And in doing that, we woke up a lot of people in these universities. There are a lot of good people in universities, and that came out. And hey, now they had some space to operate. And so we started, to finding people at these institutions, universities, who were doing good. A lot of them were doing good science, but this was not expected. These were exceptional people. But a lot more folks, we opened up a lot of space. We have a lot of partnerships with people at Carnegie Mellon, at University of Pittsburgh, at Duquesne University now, who we do work closely with that are doing good work. But we also raised that to the level of appreciation. I'm going to connect it back to the summit. So that's who we were in this space. And so at the summit, what we were doing meanwhile was thinking about back to Clareton. One of the challenges with environmental justice work is it's so hyper-local. It's about this thing right here. And if you're advocating for cleaner air around that steel mill becomes your thing. But then there are people who are advocating around fracking in another part of the county, and that's their thing. And there are people who are an incinerator, a dump site. All of these things become the thing, and you don't have people organizing across spaces. And so what this summit allowed us to do was we brought people with all types of issues into a space, and they all weren't environmental issues. A lot of them were just social justice, just injustices at large. And so what I was thinking about before, and I was talking to you about this earlier, Michelle, before we were talking about creating this social justice fellowship. And we had two models. We were doing one in Michigan and one in Pennsylvania. And the idea was to let's find this network of people in the cities in Michigan, in the cities in Pennsylvania, and let's get 5 or 6 from Pittsburgh, 5 or 6 from Philadelphia, 2 or 3 from Erie, a couple from Harrisburg, just all of the cities. And let's go to Philadelphia for a week and let's learn each other. Let's learn how we work. Let's learn what the issues are in Philadelphia, and let's put together a framework. Then from there, let's go home. We're going to meet again in a couple of weeks. We'll meet in Scranton. Let's go and learn and meet with those. And what are those issues? What are you working on? How are you doing it? Come back in a couple of weeks. We'll meet again in another city. And then put together sort of this framework across the state with advocates from across the state, learning what are the issues, what are the commonalities, because it doesn't matter. You can take me out of Pittsburgh, bring me to Baltimore. I bet you I know what the issues are. I'm not going to be surprised. There's different ways of moving and working, but we know what the issues are, and they're the same as they are in St. Louis and in San Diego. The issues are not changing. I mean, this is the byproduct of capitalism that we have. But what we wanted to do was, what are the policy asks? How are we thinking about advocacy? How are we adding that to the work? And how are we combining the work of advocates across these spaces? Where are the intersections? Because environmental justice, if you are polluting and you are producing, environmental justice is the injustice. It's aligned with educational injustice and economic injustice and health injustice and political injustice. And so if we get justice advocates across this space and food injustice and start to think about where these intersect, but how to fight at the intersections. We still need you to be the housing advocate. We still need you to be the food advocate. But we need to learn how to fight together and collectively, and we need to learn how to lift those voices across geographies so that when we have these artificially created majorities in our state senates and in our state legislature, that across the space we're asking for the same thing, and we're putting pressure and we're growing that pressure. And so what the summit forced me to do, and some other stuff, is to let's back up and rethink how we can make it more effective. Because this summit brought people together after the initial idea came together, and gives us a chance to let's iterate a little bit more, let's bring some more people into building this out. And so that's where we are now with it, is thinking about what does this look like, how do we achieve these types of conversations across the state when people are looking at very hyper-local issues and working in different spaces and different geographies, but our asks are the same and we're not going to be divided. And the conversation from earlier today, I think it was Dr. Wilson, said something about, that we haven't had an incidence of where people who are organized are defeated by organized money. That, on paper, we're still a democracy. And if we can think about how we can organize to bring those voices, to bring those actions and asks together, we should be able to achieve some different results. Since then, I've met and been working more closely with Lisa and learning about what she's doing in her little space that I came across outside of knowing who she was. And I said, whoa, this is a cool looking farm. How come I don't know about this? And then like a week later, somebody said, hey, Lisa would like to talk to you. But I saw her farm and it was closed and I couldn't wait to come back. Then the next week we were there. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa, and by profession, I am a social worker. And I've spent over 40 years in social work, working in the most distressed, at-risk communities where people really didn't want my help. Communities where there were a lot of mental health, where there was drug and alcohol, where there was shooting, where I had to go and talk someone down off a bridge, literally, where I had to go to grandma's house that was shot up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and calm people down. After 40 years of that, I was hearing voices. I was burnt out and tired. 40 years, and there was nowhere to go. Even my professor's like, you on your own. So after a while, I really was tired and burnt out. Now, I don't know how I got there, but my refuge was playing in the dirt. That's all I knew, and that's all I call it. That's all it is today. Playing in the dirt. I love playing in the dirt. My high-minded thinkers would call it environmental justice. Me, I'm just playing in the dirt. And while I'm playing in the dirt, I start playing in the dirt with my community local school and their PTA and teaching children how not to be aggressive and to think of something higher than themselves and watch it grow and non-competitive, and saw the changes and transitions it made in these little lives and understanding where their food was coming from. It changed my perspective. And growing it into a program with zero budget that had an impact of 7 days among different nonprofits in the area, oh my goodness, I'm back to my social work roots. But I was doing this on publicly owned land, and when you're on someone else's land, you're on someone else's rules and timelines. And after 5 years of building up a very successful program, I got burnt out with that, and I moved somewhere else where I could control some of the environment with a fence where people couldn't come in and take and rob and destroy the effects of what the children were doing, and it was still yet on public land. And once again, I'm following someone else's rules. And then I got this inspiration that we have so much urban blight where we live. We are in one of the historically black neighborhoods where they have torn down whole sectors, where the highway commission came in years ago and tore apart our historically black neighborhood, a thriving business district, homes and lives and families. 2,000 families were gone, wiped away, for a highway to come in and put a barrier between our community that just forced us into someone that we don't even know. And yet I'm like, okay, I learned, and I said, I'm going to own my own, where I can kind of set my own rules. I bought this condemned building from the city of Pittsburgh. It was over 10,000 square feet. It was condemned with many holes in the roof, and I thought I could do it, and then someone said $1.5 million to redevelop. I'm like, oh, okay. And I did it anyway, and I found a way to tear down the building. Oh, but before I get into this, let's go into this. The preamble to the Constitution. And I left my phone. Can you hand me my phone for 1 minute? Thank you. I'm talking to a certain group. I'm talking to all of us, but there's a certain group in particular that I want to make sure. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and on and on and on. But people don't understand, who is we the people? Who are we the people? Who are we? You have to understand that, because it still lives on today. Who are we? We, okay, for my people at home, I'm sorry you don't get to participate, but just imagine if you were here. We have a room that's probably more women than men. We have a room that's probably equally divided among people of color. And yeah, I can't tell your sexual status unless you want to identify, so I'm not assuming. But we the people, it was meant for anybody here who owns a home. Please raise your hand. You own a home? You own a home. Raise them high. Yes, own a home. Anybody here owns a home. Raise them high. Be proud. Doesn't mean you. You're excluded. You're excluded. You're excluded. You're excluded. You're excluded. We're not talking to you. Black women, raise your hand. Be black and proud. Raise it high. You're black. Person of color. Raise your hand. You are not we. You are not we. You are not we. Not you. Not you. Not you, not you. White women. Anyone white women? Raise them high. Oh, we the people? That's not you either. You, not you, not you. Sexual orientation, it was meant for straight white men who own land, who wore wigs. That's who we're talking about. We the people. So, none of you are we the people. None of you. But that's in our preamble to the Constitution, we the people. You have to be a landowner. And I'm like, well, I own my land purposely. I wanted to forget about being on somebody else's land. I'm going to own my own land. No. I pay taxes. That's my thing. Well, you're going to listen to me because I pay taxes. Well, I was going to say, does a mayor listen to me? Well, sometimes. That's my argument. I pay taxes, you're going to listen to me. Well, that got me one foot in the door, but I'm still not we the people. I went and I bought that building and I put it back together and I raised almost $700,000, me, myself, and I, to build a community store in a food desert that people turned around to me and sued me after I did it. I raised it. It was my dreams of my husband and I. It's a legacy project back to our community because we do not have fresh fruits and vegetables. And we are an urban farm. I'm an urban farmer. I was baptized by the great marijuana man himself, Willie Nelson. And I am still not a we. I don't matter. Someone came up to, well, before I raised all the money, maybe I raised all the money. We don't want, and this is what they caught me in the time of vulnerability. We don't want a fucking farm on our street. And then I turned back and I'm like, who is we? We're back to we. Who is we? I own this property. I'm a homeowner. I'm a business owner. When do I get to be we? I'm still not a we. Are you following this yet? When will we be we? I've been working with marginalized communities, and I'm still talking to marginalized communities, still trying to be a we, because we're not included. So here I go. I raised this. I'm so happy. I'm feeling so good. I've done this. I flaunt it back in their face, and I wrote this book. I took their words and I used it against them. And the title of the book is, We Don't Want a Fucking Farm on This Street. And you can buy it on Amazon today. I turned that message right back around, and I'm like, my thing is, and why I went to college, I'm sorry, this story gets divulged. Why I went to college as a black woman, an older woman, I was 30 when I went to college with one child and no income, no nothing. I wanted to learn about power. That's all I wanted to know about, because I've been oppressed all my life and I want to know power. I get off on power. When they're talking strategies and all these, and when Jamil is talking, I'm like, yeah, when he's getting ready to cuss, I'm like, yeah, I'm cussing right after you. Like, I want to know about power because I want to be a we. Okay. Now, while they were here doing their environmental justice here in Pittsburgh, Dr. Tina, she had asked me to be on a panel, and she must have been impressed with me. And she said, oh, Lisa, there's another panel. I'm like, really? So they were in Pittsburgh, and I was here, and I met Dr. Sakobi. And it changed my world. When I entered a room where I saw a room full of minority black and brown people who looked like me. I saw the other 40 that I'd never seen before. I saw power like I never knew before. I saw people who had a plan and not talking foolishness or like we remember when. That's what I always hear. We remember when. Or way back when the steel mills was open, we remember when. Well, those days are come and gone, and there's a new generation of all these brilliant minds, and then another generation of young students who can't read or write. And here I am stuck. So after that meeting, I was just so impressed, and I went back home. And there was things I was already doing, but I'm an overachiever because I'm a social worker, and I've been ordained by Willie Nelson, so I have a high level to, maintain. But I wanted to always prove that what I was doing was successful, that it was being efficient use of resources, that I was meeting out with some positive outcomes. So I partnered with the University of Pittsburgh to develop an app to measure. Our mission is food is medicine. And we tend to the needs of people with cancer, diabetes, hypertension, blood pressure, and pregnant women. All that are in our vulnerable community because we're in that pocket. They tore down all our community, all that dust. We don't grow in the ground because all that brick is underneath there after they tore down all the homes. There's nothing but brick, not soil, not rich black gold, but it's cement. So we wanted to measure and make sure that what we do is benefiting the families, that we're making an effect. So I learned here yesterday that I am the co-investigator, just like you said, and that I learned yesterday, for all the people that aren't here, you've been missing it, I'm sorry. If you haven't, you have to take advantage of as many of these sessions as you can. I learned yesterday, and I have a master's degree, that I am participating in a community-owned and managed research project. Okay. Some of the things we do, I just put my hand, I'm in the plow, I'm in the action of things. I don't have time to spend with academics or people. I have never gotten paid. What I do, I give back. This is the first year I might get paid if I write enough of a grant that they might have mercy on me. Nothing ever. My husband, before he died, he called it a very expensive hobby. But this is what I'm doing. So I have a community-owned and managed research project with the University of Pittsburgh Department of Social Work. We have a mental health, we care for the people. And I just shut my book, so now we're just doing it by heart. We care for the people. We have mental health activities because we're traumatized. I didn't realize as a community how traumatized we are on a community level. Like, people don't speak to each other anymore. Parents don't chastise other parents' kids because they're scared. Community people, neighbors come in their back door instead of coming in the front door, so they don't have to speak to you. Like, we're at a community level. We're a historically black neighborhood, and we don't get along. We don't even speak to each other, much less the fast quickness of gentrification. Now we have an emergence of race, that there's another layer of anger. They're coming back, they're taking what we have, and they have no right, no. Well, we're addressing the health of the community. We're talking about the trauma, and we're meeting on that coffee every Monday. That's really what we're doing. And we've only had 5 coffees, and we met with over 300 people. We can only sit 30 people, well, maybe 35 at a time. We've had that many people in that many sessions. So I say that's a really good thing. What else are we doing? Engagement. We have engaged with a lot of our neighbors who don't have opportunity, people who are gentrifiers and we just want to be good neighbors. Like here, you have to understand the dynamics of the community. Before you come into community, you don't recognize that it's historic black community. I see the church. Okay, so moving on forward, there's other things that we're doing now, but going forward. After coming back, I dared to dream. I'm doing legacy work now. I'm 62 years old. I know I only look 42, but I'm 62 years old. Yeah, get it to me, baby. I'm 62 years old, and we went back full circle because I can look and see that school where we started, now it's on the chopping blocks of being one of the schools that's going to be shut down, our neighborhood schools, because capacity is too low. I'm like, When I went into the schools many years ago, it's always remained to me. When I ask those kids, what do they want to be when they grow up? Their answer is, I want to get my GED. That's so sad. That's all they have to look forward to. No role models, no inspiration, no black men, no black businesses, no careers. They can't aspire because they don't see it. We don't have it in the community. Well, we're moving on, and with the help of this EPA grant, we have some other options and local foundations and USDA funding. We're buying a school. We're buying that school. And it has 3 acres, and we're developing an apprenticeship program. And we plan to be an economic generator, and we're going to teach those kids to go into the 21st century using climate-smart readiness. You all be the engineers. You all be the doctors. You're going to support me and help me when I get 65. But it was all through this, from paying attention, someone lifting up my head, inviting me to this, and understanding that there's so much going on around us that we have to open our eyes and be understanding, not just to stay in one of your lane. And I think Dr. Jamil said you have to become intersectional. We're collaborating with other urban farmers to grow their capacity, to become a food hub, to develop our own food brand, to get our own equipment, to make a real impression on young beginning farmers in the Pittsburgh region. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip all of my questions. I'm going to turn it directly over to the audience. So when you do ask a question, we just ask that you say your name and then your organization. We'll start over there.
Good afternoon. I'm Sabrina Johnson. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency. And first of all, I commend you for doing the work of providing space for restoration in addition to community capacity building and all of the other community-driven actions. And my question concerning the summit, one of the activities that you mentioned, Tina, was art therapy. And because you're in Pittsburgh, and I'm a big fan of the pioneering, tremendous, unmatched, great playwright, August Wilson. My question is theater a part of what you're considering or what you have done as spoken word, specifically as a cook to bring in youth? And the August Wilson body of work, the cultural center there, and specific works like Radio Golf that talks about gentrification and the intergenerational tug between how things used to be and the modernization that young people want to take things in. Have you considered that?
You're asking if it's part of the work. I feel like maybe it is now. That sounds amazing. I feel like we almost had to limit in year one just because of resources and time. But there were so many great things that we could bring forward, and to me that sounds like the kind of thing we should be sharing with the community and seeing like, how do you feel about this? And it's probably hard to get pushback on thinking about how do we incorporate the legacy of August Wilson and theater. But I'll say I appreciate that, and we certainly.
And now might be a good time because, in the last few years between the August Wilson Center and the August Wilson House, they're starting to come into, the August Wilson House, what is their programming going to do? And so they're there now. And so this probably is a good time to start that conversation.
We did have an environmental storyteller for one of the sessions, which was really beautiful. So she went through her degrees, speaking of who has an environmental justice degree, her degrees in environmental storytelling. So that was lovely to have.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I apologize, I have to run my session in a few minutes, but could you base your summit off of anything that anyone else had done before? And if we want to do something similar in Baltimore, could we call you? I just was so compelled by what you said about what the problems, the incinerators that are problems in Pittsburgh, I'm about to talk about lead pipes, these are the same problems, right? And so just how to maybe develop a network of what you've done and replicate your model. I mean, and I'm not giving you time to answer, but just
Yes, you can
Yes,
call, we will give you Bill's home number. Definitely, reach out in the app, we'd be happy to share anything that we can. Some of it was based on things that we had seen, but in certain spaces I felt like we were kind of pushing boundaries of what did it mean to have a summit. We started with the word symposium, we switched it to summit because it wasn't a one-day academic panel type event, and summit fit what we were doing better. We quasi-modeled it on some things that we had seen that we did not want to replicate. So yes, we had experiences. We actually went on an environmental justice tour where I think we saw some things that were powerful and other things that were like, what does this mean? So for instance, in year one, we struggled with rural versus urban issues, and we at one point we were like, we want to pull in all the voices, and we realized we just couldn't for year one. So we intentionally kept it more focused in Pittsburgh with urban issues. We had gone on a tour, we saw a lot of crackland, and we saw some of the things, citizens who were impacted with the train derailment in East Palestine. But we really wrestled with a lot of questions and had to narrow the focus to what we thought we could reasonably manage.
And I can say more specifically, visiting the rural communities, I want to speak for myself, but we talked about it. So we didn't feel comfortable with the level of whiteness, for lack of a better word. Yeah, the white supremacy culture and the way people interact with each other is so prevalent, and the lack of recognition. I guess not the knowledge of the harm that could be done if we brought everyone together in year one, and the focus was on rural communities and not what was already happening. But also, no, we didn't have a model where we did the surrounding healing justice activities, and a lot of that, Tina, the first day we mentioned it, was so on board and such a champion of it, and was immediately an equal partner in that. And Tina's the only one that we ever talked to that was like, yes, let's do this. Everybody else, it was kind of an uphill battle, so I've always been so grateful for that. Andre mentioned I'm also a liberation facilitator and warm data host, so I've been intentionally trying to bring in all of my other work into this more like academic space. People don't always like that.
Thank you, I love it.
No questions? Okay, well then I will pose one last question to the panel. So what message would you like to leave with our audience about the importance of sustaining momentum and fostering collaborative action in environmental justice?
Message to leave with the audience?
Mm-hmm.
Keep working.
And keep talking through things with people.
Don't be discouraged by negative feedback because the haters are real. And they become your biggest champions.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's
Write a book
like,
about them.
in order to do this right, it's so far outside of anything that we've done before. Because we're not going to do it alone. We're not going to do it without rethinking how, the history of how we got here. Let's address that. Let's think about all of the different intersections and silos and all the ways that people have been hurt. And we know that when people are hurt, it's a different challenge in getting them to open up. And so we have to, this has not been done before, otherwise you have a model. And so we're still thinking about that. But I think we and a lot of what you're doing is headed in the right direction. We need to link it.
And I would say, post it. Like, Facebook is now my friend. I don't even know social media. Like, I just start posting some good things, happy things, and people start recognizing that. Like, oh, you put that energy out, and you'd be surprised how many people gravitate to that energy. Tell your story. Put it out there.
Well, we thank you all for coming, and if we could give one last round of applause to our panelists. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're too dry.
I'm too dry.
I'm actually
Yes.
Yeah.
Say that again?
I'm Roger. I read the stories. Just over and I feel that it's very interesting. And I feel that you might be interested in my next presentation. I'm going to present
Right now?
Yeah, like 3:30.
Which room is it in? Room 2115. I don't even know. But go get ready. It's okay. Maybe. Thank you. So, how'd that go? I don't have time to think. If I had time to think, I'd probably have time to sleep. I sleep in, I think, by the way. I sleep in, I think, almost as much as I drink. Andre and